Before we begin, it's important to note that this episode contains topics that some people may find upsetting. The conversation includes discussion of eating disorders, drug use, depression, and suicide. Please listen at your own discretion.
Welcome to the Season 4 debut of the In Chamber. I'm Tom Schumann. This is our fourth year of bringing you conversations with business, community, education, and political leaders. Most guests are from within our state. A few have ties to Indiana or are coming here as part of Indiana Chamber programs and events. Season 3, for example, kicked off with 2019 Annual Awards Dinner speakers Dana Perino and Donna Brazil. Today's guest was scheduled to be here in 2 weeks for the Indiana Employer Opioid Summit. COVID-19 has postponed that in-person visit, but he'll be sharing his powerful message virtually as the keynote speaker for the event. Do you need some evidence of that powerful message? Listen to the following in his own words, written earlier this year. It'll set the stage and we'll fill in the gaps during our conversation. Quote, early April 2007, I stood at my father's door, ashamed, guilty, and broken. He had no idea that I struggled with drugs and alcohol. I justified my silence so as not to burden him in his golden years. I lurked outside his apartment door for 5 minutes, crying and almost going home. I finally knocked. He answered the door and, as usual, was ecstatic to see his middle son. As usual, he offered me something to eat. As usual, he asked if I needed any money. It didn't matter what my financial situation was, he asked. That morning, I only wanted his love, which I received every moment of every day from the time I was born. We sat on his couch. He knew something was wrong. I began crying again. Over the course of an hour, I unloaded decades of pain, things I kept from him because I loved him, because I did not want to burden him, because I did not want to see his disappointment in me. I did not want to see his pain over my failures in life. That's what I told myself. He held me, he cried with me. Then he said the one thing that defined everything he had taught his sons growing up. Brian, I love you. Move in with me and we will get through this together. Brian Cuban, welcome to the In Chamber.
It's so great to be on with you all. And I do have connections to Indiana. My older brother, Mark, went to IU. And my nephew, my younger brother's son, has just started as a freshman at IU.
Excellent, Brian. We'll get into the IU a little bit later, but we want to talk about recovery, and we want to get to that positive message. But of course, for the full understanding of the listeners, they have to kind of understand the depths before the glories. If you would a little bit, talk about, you experienced 27 years of eating disorders. Talk, if you would, about how they impacted your life in so many ways.
Sure. My eating disorders began as a freshman at Penn State University in 1979. It began as restricting my food intake, and it transitioned into bulimia, traditional bulimia, binging and purging, and then exercise bulimia, which is obsessive compulsive exercise for the primary purpose of offsetting calories. And all these were wrapped around a desire for acceptance and negative self-image. And to understand what that means, we have to take steps even further back to my childhood and talk a little bit about the trauma that I sustained moving forward in life as a teenager. I was a heavy kid, trending towards obese, and there was a lot of fat shaming in my household. And I'll tell you a little bit about this, but I want to make it clear that I do not blame my mother for the things that I went through. There is a difference between cause and correlation. So not everyone who sustains fat shaming will go through the same things I did. That's why it's correlation. My mother I would come home from school during lunch and I would be eating Chef Boyardee ravioli out of the can. Do they still have that? Just the beefaroni and all those things?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
My mother would come home from selling real estate. She would see me doing that and she said, Brian, if you keep eating like that, you're going to be a fat pig. Now, these were the same thing. These were the things my mother's mother said to her. These were the things my great grandmother said to my grandmother. I came from an Eastern European Jewish family, all immigrants, and with a very dysfunctional relationship around food, always pushing it, pushing it, pushing it, my grandmother. And my mother had a very verbally abusive relationship with her mother, who also had her own mental health issues. And so these things kind of run downhill. And my mother struggled with her mental health issues at a time when a woman talking about depression or some other issue could get institutionalized. And so we didn't talk about these things because to talk about it was to get the disease like it was contagious. We didn't have the understanding we have today, and the stigma was exponentially worse for women. But not understanding these things and not understanding the psychology as a teenager, to hear these words, and I was getting them at school too, the bullying and the fat shaming, I grew depressed and I began to eat more Chef Boyardee ravioli and more Chef Boyardee ravioli, and I became a bigger Brian and a bigger Brian. And this all culminated in what I call the day of the gold pants. My older brother Mark had given me a pair of shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants. This was the disco era of the mid-70s with Saturday Night Fever and John Travolta, if you've ever seen that movie. And the pants fit Mark well, but they didn't fit me that well. I had to jump up and down, spray the water bottle on. My butt looked like 15 cats back there, but I didn't care because my brother gave me those pants. I love my brother. They were a symbol of his love, and I wore those pants to school almost every day and stood them up in the corner. And as you might imagine, the kids made fun. And I'm walking home from school one day, a mile walk to our house with these kids. And in my mind, these were the popular kids, the prom queen, the prom kings, the kids getting their first kiss, the kids holding hands, their first date. This was before the internet. So my images of acceptance and popularity were the kids I saw every day at school. I didn't have these photoshopped images to go online. It was who was popular and the things I wanted. The kids start making fun, this group of boys start making fun of my pants, and they decided that I was just too quote unquote fat to wear those pants. And they physically assaulted me on that sidewalk a mile from my house. They ripped the pants off me down to my Fruit of the Loom tighty whities, my Keds tennis shoes, my tube socks, and this was in Pittsburgh, my Pittsburgh Pirates t-shirt and my ball cap. They went on like they had done the funniest thing ever. I walk out in the street, I gather up the shreds, I put them over my underwear, and I waddle home. People gawked, no one stopped. I got home and I went downstairs to the basement. The house was empty, and I shoved these clothes into the trash, hoping that to hide my shame, to forget my shame. I didn't want my brothers to know about it. I didn't want my parents to know about it. But it was right around then. We talk about these bright line moments in our journey. It was right around then that I remember thinking to myself that I will never be loved. I will never be loved by my mother. I will never have a girlfriend. And my mother loved me dearly. She was dealing with her own issues. And all I would ever see in my reflection was this huge stomach, and I was just this fat, unlovable pig, as I'd been told. And that
And
was my identity. And so I went on to Penn State with that identity of this unlovable fat pig. And in my mind, the way to acceptance and love was to get thinner. And so I began to restrict my food intake. I began to binge and purge. But no matter how and I started losing weight, but no matter how thin I got, and when I binged and purged for a few moments, I had this feeling of peace. But when the peace was gone after this few moments, this overwhelming feeling of shame swept into my gut. The shame of engaging in an act that I didn't understand but felt was inherently shameful. This was 1979. I didn't know what an eating disorder was. That's how it began.
yeah, but Brian, the tie between those is fascinating. I mean, the what you experienced as a child, and then your reactions in college. Those I'd read those. I'd read two separate things, but you brought them together and tied them together. So I think that's so important. What people probably overlook at times of the long lasting impacts. In addition to, even moving beyond that, then excessive drinking, drug use became part of the mix. When did that begin? And when I say excessive, what does that mean in your case?
In high school, I would classify it more as occasional binge drinking, going to parties and just going out with my friends once in a while. But I wouldn't. It really tripped over into just day in and almost day out problem drinking in college. I turned 21. I became old enough to drink, and in very short order, I was drinking alone. I was going out to our state stores in Pennsylvania. We don't have liquor stores, we have state stores. And I was buying a bottle of tequila to get drunk before I went to the bars alone. And I was showing up to class drunk and hungover. I remember the closest I ever came to an epiphany on recovery at Penn State was walking into, I believe it was a White Tower or a White Castle hamburger place. And there was a rack of pamphlets that the 12-step groups put out. And for those who don't know, I'm sure most of us do, the most well-known alcohol-focused is AA, but there are others. And it was called the 20 Questions, these pamphlets, and it was geared towards college students. Answer these questions, and if you answer these many, check off these many, you might have a drinking problem. Come see us. Come to a meeting. And I'm checking off all these yes. Do you pass out? Do you miss class? Do you black out? Yes, yes, yes. I crumple it up and take my basketball shot into the trash can. I'm just a college student. That was as close as I came in college. And it was just nonstop. And I was trying to depress and mute the shame of that little boy who did not love himself. Everything wrapped around the trauma of that little boy who just did not love himself. And because he didn't know how to love himself and he hated himself and he was ashamed of himself, binging and purging didn't satisfy that. I began the drinking would, and I drank to mute the pain, to mute the feelings. And I went through my 4 years at Penn State in that manner. And I was a criminal justice major. I wanted to be a police officer. That would have worked out well. I'd have been the first guy in the evidence room trading out the mannitol for the blow, believe me.
So
But
you'd have been your own Law and Order episodes in real life.
That's right. I would have been my own Law and Order episode. So that really defined my 4 years at Penn State. And I began to run excessively as well, because the only time I felt alive, to the extent I could feel alive during those times, was by myself. Because if I go out and run 10 miles or 20 miles, I don't have to be around anyone.
Brian, did you consider yourself to be, in the ensuing years, very good at hiding things? Did it come naturally to keep this to yourself and have it not be evident to others?
I don't think it came naturally. I think it was a second education in deception and in deceiving, so I could put on a face of normality to what I perceived others viewed as normality. And you just get good at it. You get good at hiding the binging and purging in the bathroom, in the community bathroom, in the dorm room. You get good at drinking, hiding the drinking. And in the college atmosphere, to an extent, so many people are doing that. It may not look unusual to another student, and other students are wrapped up in their own problems. And again, this is before the internet. This is now into the 80s. So it was much easier to engage in cloaking behaviors at that time. But it's an education. You learn. I say I have my JD in law. I have my PhD in cloaking and deception that I developed over the years.
So not only you do this, you explain the college experience, you do the hiding, the excessive behaviors, unfortunately, for 20 plus years as a lawyer. How do you do those two together? How do you combine those two?
It was by hanging out only with people who did what I do. So I discovered cocaine in a bathroom in the summer of 1987. After I'd moved to Dallas, I'd failed the bar twice, both times relating to my drug and alcohol use. The first time I took the Texas bar exam, my study aids were a fifth of Jack Daniels, 3.5 ounces of cocaine, and a liter of tab, and some review books I borrowed that weekend in a roadway motel, staying in a roadway motel. So when cocaine and alcohol began to take over my life as a lawyer, it is a little more tricky because I'm around more people, but the coping mechanisms are the same. So how can I cope? Well, I have to pull back and insert myself within the group of people who don't judge me, at least until the cocaine is gone. The people who use cocaine on a regular basis like I do, the people who are at a different bar every night like I am, but you still have to develop different cloaking skills, because now I am doing cocaine in the courthouse. I am doing cocaine in the bathrooms of the state courthouse. I am doing cocaine in my office, and I am going to hearings under the influence and hungover. And so you say, how can people not know? Well, I don't know what they knew. What happens is this is one of the things that I talk about all the time. People, you have to say something, right? I don't want to say anything because what if I'm wrong? I don't want to say anything. It's none of my business. So I don't know what people knew at that time, but I knew the behaviors I was engaging in. And it becomes just a vicious cycle in which eventually cratered my legal practice.
Brian, you mentioned your brother Mark, not only the IU grad, but the longtime owner of the Dallas Mavericks. So the Mavericks, a very successful franchise in the mid 2000s, 2006, I believe, NBA Finals. Talk about that a little bit. Your experience being in the same city with Mark.
Yeah. That one we didn't win. We did win one after that.
Absolutely.
The 2006 NBA Finals kind of personifies my life, the chaos of my life. When we went to the finals, I had the opportunity to get tickets for friends, and the finals were against the Miami Heat. I had the opportunity, so I called up Mark and got the tickets. Do you think I gave 2 very nice seats? You might be thinking I gave them to my friends. No, I didn't. No, I didn't sell them on eBay for some astronomical amount either. I took those 2 tickets and I traded them to my cocaine dealer for $1,000 in cocaine. My dealer shows up at my house. I give him the tickets. He gives me this giant Ziploc baggie of cocaine. I go running upstairs to my home office, dump it out on the desk like I'm Scarface, this giant cocaine kingdom sitting there in this pile. I wanted to put my head in it and go, blah, 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 blah. And of course, I've got it for a reason. I line out the lines. I roll up a dollar bill. I remember looking at the dollar bill and have a moment of semi-clarity thinking, cocaine users are an ironic bunch. We'll wash our hands and we'll clean up ourselves, but we'll shove a dollar bill up our nose. It's been who knows where, right? In any event, cocaine had long stopped giving me the feeling of love and acceptance. It was just chasing the high, chasing the high, chasing the high. But it was never the awareness of, well, maybe I have an issue. It was the awareness of, well, maybe I need a new dealer. Maybe I need to change from Jack Daniels to Grey Goose in my balancing act. And then came the paranoia that often comes with long-term cocaine addiction. Do I hear the cops outside? Is SWAT going to come busting through my window? I take the cocaine, I hide it. I drive to a Home Depot. I buy electrical faceplate outlets, a drill, and a saw. I go back to my house. I go upstairs to the closets in my house, the drywall in the closets. I take the drill and the saw, bzz, 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 and I create these fake electrical outlets to hide my cocaine. Like the DEA, the cops, and the drug dogs have never thought of that before. I'm thinking I'm this brilliant lawyer. So I put the cocaine in these smaller Ziploc baggies. I put in all these fake electrical outlets. I close it up, bzz, 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 thinking I'm just brilliant. I do a little more, and again, just chasing the high, chasing the high. And then a little bit later, the paranoia again. The cops are really outside. My drug dealer's really just setting me up. He's a narc. I go back to the electrical outlets. Bzz, 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 bzz. I take all the cocaine out. I put it back in the giant Ziploc baggie, the original one. I go to my bathroom in my bedroom and flush it down the toilet. Now it's about $900 worth of cocaine. The next morning comes, I wake up, and as so often happens when a perceived negative event gets in the rearview mirror, whether it's a DWI where you swear you'll never drink again, which I have that as well, spent my night in the drunk tank, and I'm such an idiot. Did I just really flush that cocaine down the toilet? Who does that? There's another game tonight. I call up my drug dealer again. He comes, I get 2 more tickets. He comes over. He says, dude, you did all that last night? I didn't want to tell him I flushed it down the toilet. What moron does that? I said, yes, I need more. I did it all last night. Yes. Okay, here you go, dude. Give him the tickets. He gives me the cocaine. Back up to my home office. Dump it all out. Once more. Line it out. Chasing the high, just pain and shame. Paranoia. Go back to the fake electrical outlets. Hide it again. Maybe 15 minutes later, take it out again, go back to that same toilet, drop to my knees like I'd done so many times before, hoping, praying, wishing someone or something to take away my pain and my shame, and flushed it down the toilet again. Now, they say when Dallas flushes, it ends up downstream in Houston. So maybe some people in Houston had a little hop in their step. The insanity of addiction, right? Trying to do the same thing over and over and hoping for a different result.
Yeah, Brian, that's thank you for sharing with the listeners. I know you talk about it a lot, but that certainly details the depth of what you were going through. Well, a lot going on around this time. I mentioned it's 2006. You're also having suicidal thoughts around that time. But again, the passage I read at the beginning was April of the next year, 2007. Yes. So put that time frame a little bit. What prompted the shift from suicidal thoughts to I can change, I can recover, I can move forward?
Wonderful question. In the summer of 2005, I became so despondent and hopeless that I would never see anything but the hand in front of my face and the drugs in front of my face and the alcohol in front of my face, and that I was such a black stain on the Cuban name. I decided I would be doing my family a favor by ending my life by suicide. And it was very close. I had a friend who, bless his heart, received some disturbing emails from me and immediately contacted my brothers. Before Mark flew in from LA, my brother Jeff came to the house. I had a .45 automatic on my nightstand. They took the weapon, they cleaned up the house, and dragged me kicking and screaming on my first of 2 trips down to a local psychiatric hospital. They're trying to save my life. I'm thinking, get out of my life. I just want to leave me alone. And much to their chagrin, I understood as a lawyer what I needed to say at that time. So they couldn't hold me. I'm not a danger to myself. I'm not a danger to the others, talking to the psychiatrist. So they took me back home and did what we call the Cuban rehab. My brothers were no different, trying to figure it out. Well, take your car keys, stay in your house for 2 weeks, and everything's going to be okay. I had 2 thoughts when they said that to me. One, no problem, my drug dealer delivers, the Mavericks tickets guy. The party will come to me. And 2, now they know. Now they really know. So the party came to me. I stayed in the house for 2 weeks. And my solution was to distance from my family. I stopped seeing my brothers. I stopped going to family events. I stopped seeing my father, my nieces and nephews, and only hung out, like I said, with the people who did what I did. Party, 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 party. In the summer, in 2007, I was out at one of my week-long birthday celebrations in January when the cocaine ended. When the cocaine began and the cocaine ended was my birthday celebrations every year. And I'm in this bar, and a girl walks in. Her name's Amanda. She doesn't do drugs and didn't very light drinker. But I guess I was able to wear a mask one last time to convince her I was this respectable lawyer. And as people know, the deeper we get into addiction, whether it's problem drinking or alcohol or drugs, it becomes very hard to continually wear these masks. And we moved in together. And I remember a friend of mine asking, when I told him, a friend I did drugs with, asking, how is that going to work? And I said to him, it will cause me to stop if she moves in. So now I'm starting to go through the stages of change, right? The pre-contemplation stage of change, where I realize I have a problem, but I'm not really into the next stage yet. And so we move in together. Easter weekend 2007, she goes away and to visit her parents. I go out. The next thing I know, it's 2 days later. It's the middle of the afternoon. She's looking down at me. There's cocaine everywhere. There's alcohol bottles strewn across my bedroom. I think she's trying to figure out if she walked in the right house. I'm trying to orient myself and then figure out what lie I can tell to explain this Law and Order orgy of evidence that I might not be the person I claim to be. All I can think of was the metaphorical run home to mama. I said to her, take me back to this name psychiatric hospital. You've been to a psychiatric hospital? Yeah, there are some things you don't know. We'll talk about that later. But in my mind, it was really take me back so I have time to think of a better lie. It wasn't this epiphany yet.
So you weren't quite there yet.
I wasn't quite there yet. But we're standing in the parking lot waiting for intake. She's crying, thinking she's gone. I'd leave. She stood by me. And we dated she moved out. We dated for over a decade while I rebuilt the broken trust and found recovery. And we have now been married going close to 4 years.
Excellent. Congratulations.
So it won't work for everyone. That won't happen for everyone, but for us it did. And my apologies to my wife for getting the dates wrong. But and I had another thought. There wasn't going to be a third trip back because I'd be dead. And I thought about my father. We started out with my father. Let's circle back. I thought about my father, a veteran of the Pacific, Okinawa, the Battle of Okinawa, a veteran of Korea, old school, greatest generation. He used to say to us growing up, to my brothers and I have a younger brother, Jeff, guys, whatever you do in life, wherever you go, no matter where your travels take you, pick up that phone, call your brother, tell your brother you love him, make sure he's okay. And that is what saved my life. My father was the middle of 3 boys. He understood. That is the bond he had with his brothers. He and his older brother, Marty, from the end of the Korean War until his brother passed away in 1999, had an auto trim shop in the same spot in Pittsburgh. They put on convertible tops and things like that and reupholstered cars. The same spot in Pittsburgh, worked together for all those years. And sometimes it was like a bad marriage, but they had that bond of brothers. They had that bond. And this was the gift he passed on to me and my brothers. And if you want to know how that gift stuck, all of these decades later, 1,200 miles from Pittsburgh and Dallas, Texas, Mark, Jeff, and I live walking distance from each other. And until my father passed away 2 years ago, July, he lived across the street from me. And I don't mean metaphorically across the street. I mean across the street. That is how that bond stuck. And I thought about that in that parking lot, and I wasn't ready to lose that bond of my brothers. Because families continue to love, and I know they did, but they distance, right? They distance, and I could feel that distance. I had been part of that distancing, and I didn't want to lose my family. And so I decided that it was time to take that first scary step, push myself to the edge of that plane, and trust that the parachute will open.
Brian, a question about recovery and the evolution of it. How is recovery in 2020, or take 2017, choose your year? How is it different now or in recent years compared to what it was like in 2007 in your journey?
In my journey, when I walked into my psychiatrist's office, and he suggested there were 2 options. He suggested residential treatment. And I refused. And I remember it was kind of funny when he suggested 12-step. The 12-step groups were right next door, the meeting room. And I refused. And at first I refused. And I remember saying, I can't go to 12-step. They smoke out there. I don't smoke. Secondhand smoke will kill you. I see them smoking out there. But those were the only two options my psychiatrist was aware of. And we have so many other options today. And back then it really was. You were either in, and even when I was in law school and going through this, it was even more different. It wasn't even, there was no residential treatment, the evolution to a large extent. You were in a hospital ward or you were in 12-step. And so there has been this evolution in this of the science of recovery and the options of recovery. We have harm reduction, we have smart recovery, we have refuge recovery, we have harm reduction in alcohol, which causes people to tense up and all those things because it's not abstinence. My path had to be abstinence. There was no choice for me. There was no such thing for me as one line of cocaine without a drink and one drink without more than one line of cocaine. Nothing else was going to work for me. But that's my path. I don't tell anyone what their path should be. You meet people where they are. But we have science. We have now a lot of science and data that tells us what works and what doesn't work in terms of, and people can disagree, but there were only two options in my day: treatment or 12-step.
Brian, for you engage in conversations like this. You speak at events, as you're going to do in a couple of weeks at the Opioid Summit. You write prolifically. I want to ask you a little bit about your books. Are those, couple questions, are those therapeutic for you in different ways? And do you feel some of the methods are more effective than others for getting the word out and helping others?
When I wrote my first book, which was more on body image and eating disorders, it was absolutely a journey in self-recovery and catharsis and therapeutic my own therapy, self-therapy. Absolutely. My second book was more a journey of being in a profession where I saw so many lawyers struggling and so much stigma. In the legal profession, we have this stigma that the societal stigma surrounding addiction, that it's a moral failing and this and that, and it's a choice. Pull it up by your bootstraps, especially in the legal profession. And then we have this stigma piled on top of that in the profession itself, that we can't allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we can't allow ourselves to seek help. And so I saw this day in and day out. It wasn't just me. And I felt there was a hole to be filled. And that's why I wrote the second book. And what I have learned during that time, not being a therapist, but anecdotally from the responses, the emails, that there is nothing more powerful anecdotally than the power of story to break stigma. People want to know that they are not alone. People want to know that there is a path, because they don't need to walk into a therapist's office to know that there was someone else they can talk to break the stigma. Now, I'm not discounting therapy. I'm still in therapy. I see a psychiatrist once a week by teletherapy now in COVID. But people need to know, just on the street grassroots level, that they are not alone. And the power of storytelling does this. And this is science supported, that storytelling breaks stigma. Storytelling is a powerful tool to allow people to take steps forward.
So the title of that second book was The Addicted Lawyer: Tales of the Bar, Booze, Blow, and Redemption. And I was fascinated, reading that the rate of problem drinkers in the legal professions nearly double that of the general population. Have you seen any changes in that since you wrote that book, or is it evolving at all?
Sure, the legal profession is definitely evolving. There was a study that came out now, I want to say three going on 4 years ago. The ABA, American Bar Association, Betty Ford Hazelton. It's a peer-reviewed study on problem drinking and depression and other mental health issues in the legal profession. And when you it found that the overall rate is about 21% or so, which is twice the general population. But when you get into the millennials, it jumps up to over 30%. So we are a profession that is certainly in crisis with return, at least at the time that study came out, with regards to problem drinking. Now, the profession has responded. We are seeing a paradigm change in how law firms address mental health, the tools put in place to address mental health, how lawyers' assistance programs address mental health. Absolutely, we are seeing this just hardcore pivot into more resources, more empathy, more reaching out. Now, how has this helped? We won't know until the next study comes out. And now we won't know also how COVID has affected that as well, because we were trending towards a better profession in terms of wellness. Has COVID pulled us a step back? I don't know. The gut common sense feeling would be to say, sure, it probably has. But until we see the data, it's going to be hard to know.
Ryan, you talked about stigma earlier, and certainly one of the goals of our Indiana Workforce Recovery Initiative is to help diminish that stigma in the workplace, have people, not be afraid to come forward. Sometimes easier said than done, but what have you seen as far as the workplace in general? Is there opportunities for people to come forward to maybe overcome that stigma?
Absolutely, and now we have to look at it on two separate issues. Are the workplaces putting in place protocols, putting in place paths, at least in the larger workplaces, that if somebody wants to take the road, right, they can take that road. But does having that break stigma? The path is there. That's you can correlate that to putting a path in for Brian. Residential treatment is there, 12-step is there. But if I feel like I'm going to be judged, if I feel like there is a shame, that doesn't break the stigma. There's a path there, and there was always a path for me. I recovered in privilege. We should talk about that for 2 seconds. It would be disingenuous for me not to address the fact that I recovered in privilege. I went through addiction and privilege, and I went through recovery and privilege. Addiction does not discriminate, recovery does. And so I always had the ability to take the path, but because of stigma, I didn't take it. So within the workplace, how do we break that stigma? I still think we need to do better with the storytelling aspect, with the letting people know within the workplace that there are people just like you dealing with this. And I think I'm most familiar with this in the law firm aspect, especially within the big law and the AM law, where we are seeing people step up and tell their stories. I think within the general corporate workplace, we need to see more of that. You can put the wellness in place. You can put the hotlines. You can put the anonymous places. You can put the resources on the website. You can put the yoga and the meditation. But how do we make somebody break through the trauma? Give them the opportunity to break through the trauma. The person who just feels so ashamed that no matter how much yoga or meditation you put in place, they're not going to do anything. And I still think the power of storytelling is the most useful, the most impactful tool. And it takes more awareness within the corporate structure of who are we? Who do we want to be? We want to be storytellers. We want to be storytellers. Who are our storytellers? Who can be our recovery storytellers? Because that will help.
And anybody can be a storyteller.
We are all storytellers.
It's not a professional. It's not a professional occupation. Even just sharing makes you a storyteller.
Humans are storytellers from the beginnings of when our ancestors sat around the fire and talked about hunting. We are storytellers, and you're right. Everyone tells stories every moment of the day, and if you think about it and go back and look at that, you can shift and say, okay, I can tell a story this way. Now, to do that, we have to be somebody who's already addressed their own stigma. And that doesn't mean everyone needs to be a recovery storyteller. But I encourage the ones who do, and I encourage the people within human resources and above, the decision makers, to look for the storytellers.
Brian, two things as we prepare to wrap up. Speaking of storytelling, I read you're working on a fiction book. What are we going to be reading about there, and what prompted you to go in that direction?
I am. I'm working on. It's called The Ambulance Chaser, and it's finishing up. It is about a Pittsburgh lawyer who is accused of a crime 30 years prior, an awful crime that he didn't commit, and he has to go on the lam to bring back the only person who can prove his innocence, and that person doesn't really want to come. And the bad guys are chasing him to silence him and the other witness. And so it's going to come out next year. And they prompted me is I love telling stories, and part of COVID, and part of although I started this before COVID, but I finished most of it during, is I wanted push myself, and I want to explore things that I haven't explored before. And one of these is the ability to just tell a story that isn't mine. And so writing nonfiction memoir style is relatively easy because I know my story. Having to create a story out of thin air was a totally different animal. And so it's been challenging. And just like recovery, there are so many parallels. It's scary. And I don't know how to write. I don't know how to do this. People are going to laugh at me. People are going to hate it. I'm going to get awful Amazon reviews. Projection. And what have I learned in recovery that I use every day in quarantine? My thoughts are not facts. Get out there and do it.
Brian, last question I have. As I said, this is our kickoff of season 4, so all of our guests are going to get this question throughout the year. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. What makes a great day for Brian Cuban?
To wake up, walk to the mirror in my bathroom, birthday suit naked, see my reflection, and love Brian.
Powerful. Absolutely. Brian, we look forward so much to your message at the Indiana Employer Opioid Summit. Thanks for sharing your time, your insights with our listeners today.
It was such an honor. Thank you. And I look forward to seeing everyone virtually now at the summit.
All right. Well, thank you. We've just heard from Brian Cuban. Again, great perspective, sharing his own personal journey as well as lessons learned as he assists in the recovery effort of so many. The Indiana Employer Opioid Summit on September 16th is being presented by the Wellness Council of Indiana and the Indiana Chamber. You can visit wellnessindiana.org for all the details. As I mentioned, attendees will hear much more from Brian and enjoy presentations from leaders in Indiana's business, community, and recovery communities. At the same website, you can learn more about the Indiana Workforce Recovery Initiative and the great work it continues to do. And finally, the 2019 archives of BizVoice magazine contain a year-long series on IWR, the challenges and opportunities of opioid and other drug use in the workplace. Those stories are at bizvoicemagazine.com. We return in 2 weeks with our next episode, a conversation with Kimberly Lewis, someone here in Indianapolis dealing with recovery issues and a great story that she'll be able to share. Thanks as always for listening.